John's heart raced as he stood face to face with the woman who had been haunting his thoughts for weeks. She looked just like Sarah, the same soft features and familiar eyes that once filled his world with warmth. But as she spoke, the words that came out changed everything. "I didn't know Sarah had passed," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I've been searching for her for years." John's breath caught in his throat, just as he was about to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. She reached into her bag and pulled out something that stopped him cold. John sat in his dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the photo of his late wife, Sarah. It had been over a year since the accident that took her life. And though time had dulled the sharpness of his grief, it hadn't filled the void. He had spent countless nights thinking about her, replaying moments from their life together, wondering how things might have been different if she were still here. But it wasn't just his grief that kept him awake now. It was Emily. Their daughter, Emily, was only 8 years old when Sarah passed away, too young to fully understand the complexities of death, but old enough to feel its absence. For months, she had been quiet, withdrawn, struggling to cope with the loss of her mother, but lately, something had changed. Emily had started talking about seeing Sarah. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be easily brushed off as a child's imagination. Emily wasn't telling stories about dreams or imaginary conversations with her mom. She was insisting that she had seen her, in public places around their neighborhood, even near her school. It wasn't just a vague sighting either. Emily described the woman in detail, dark hair like Sarah's, the same warm smile, and even the same clothes Sarah used to wear. At first, John thought it was just Emily's grief manifesting in strange ways. It wasn't uncommon for children to see echoes of their lost loved ones in the world around them. He had tried to comfort her, explaining gently that sometimes, when we miss someone too much, our minds play tricks on us. But Emily was adamant. This wasn't a trick. She was convinced that the woman she had seen wasn't just a stranger who looked like her mom. It was her mom. John didn't know what to make of it. He had even started to question whether something supernatural might be happening. He knew it sounded ridiculous, but the certainty in Emily's voice made him wonder. But the rational part of him, the part that had always relied on logic and reason, told him that there had to be a more mundane explanation. Still, the mystery gnawed at him. Could it be possible that Emily was seeing someone who bore an uncanny resemblance to Sarah? And if so, who could it be? One evening, after another long day of trying to juggle work and parenting, John sat Emily down to talk about her latest sighting. This time, she had seen the woman in the grocery store, browsing the produce section just a few feet away from her. Emily had watched her for a long time, trying to build up the courage to approach her, but before she could, the woman had disappeared around the corner. "Are you sure it was her, Emily?" John asked, his voice soft but probing. "Yes, Dad," Emily replied with a certainty that shook John to his core. "It was her. I know it was." John didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe her, but how could he? Sarah was gone, and no amount of wishful thinking could bring her back. But something in Emily's voice, something unshakable, kept the seed of doubt alive in his mind. What if there was something to this? What if Emily wasn't imagining things? And what if the woman she kept seeing wasn't Sarah, but someone else? That night, John made a decision. He would find out the truth, whatever it was. The next day, John began his search. He didn't know where to start, so he started with the basics. He combed through old family records, searching for any mention of a relative who might look like Sarah. But he found nothing. Sarah's family tree was as straightforward as they came. No twins, no estranged sisters, no distant cousins who could explain the mystery woman. It was a dead end, but John wasn't ready to give up. As the days turned into weeks, John broadened his search. He began spending hours at his computer, scouring social media platforms, hoping to find a profile or a photo that would give him a lead. He reached out to old friends and distant relatives, asking if anyone had heard of someone who resembled Sarah. But again, nothing. Despite the lack of progress, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the cusp of discovering something important. Emily continued to see the woman sporadically, always from a distance, always in public places. It was as if the woman was deliberately avoiding direct contact. But why? Then, one afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. John was walking Emily home from school when their neighbor, Mrs. Harper, called out to them from across the street. She was an older woman, kind but nosy, and John had always assumed she kept tabs on everyone in the neighborhood. "I need to talk to you, John," Mrs. Harper said, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "It's about the woman." John froze. "What woman?" Mrs. Harper leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "The one who looks like Sarah. I've seen her too." For a moment, John didn't know how to respond. He had been so caught up in his own investigation that he hadn't considered the possibility that someone else might have noticed the woman. He felt a surge of hope and fear at the same time. "Where did you see her?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Near Emily's school," Mrs. Harper replied. "I saw her a few times, always hanging around after the kids were let out. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I heard what Emily's been saying, and I started to wonder." Mrs. Harper went on to describe the woman in detail, confirming everything Emily had told him. But then she added something that sent a chill down John's spine. She had seen the woman get into a car once, and she had managed to jot down part of the license plate. Armed with this new information, John took the partial plate to a private investigator. Within days, the investigator had tracked down the car's owner, and John was left staring at a name that felt both familiar and foreign. Rachel. Sarah had a twin sister. John sat in stunned silence as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah had never mentioned a twin, at least not in any meaningful way. He vaguely remembered her mentioning a falling out with a sibling years ago, but he had never pressed for details. Now he wished he had. Rachel had been estranged from the family for years, wandering from place to place, keeping her distance. But now, for some reason, she had returned. The revelation left John reeling. What had kept Sarah and Rachel apart for so long? And why had Rachel decided to come back now, after Sarah's death? Was she here to make amends? Or was there something else going on? John knew he had to find out. He arranged a meeting with Rachel, unsure of what to expect. When the day of the meeting arrived, he felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. As he sat in a quiet cafe waiting for her to arrive, his mind raced with questions. When the door opened and Rachel walked in, John's heart skipped a beat. The resemblance to Sarah was uncanny. It was like looking at a ghost, except this ghost had a harder edge, a weariness that Sarah had never carried. They sat across from each other, the silence thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Rachel broke the ice. "I know this is probably a shock to you," she said, her voice softer than John had expected. "It's been a long time." John nodded, unsure of what to say. "Why now?" he finally asked. Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I didn't know Sarah had passed until a few months ago. By the time I found out, it was too late to make amends. I thought about leaving, about going back to where I came from, but I couldn't. I needed to see her even if she wasn't here anymore." John listened, his heart heavy. "Emily's been seeing you," he said quietly. "She thinks you're Sarah." Rachel's eyes softened. "I've seen her too. I didn't mean to scare her. I just didn't know how to approach you or her." They talked for hours, untangling the complicated web of family history that had kept them apart. Rachel admitted that she had always wanted to reconnect with Sarah, but had been too afraid. Now all she had left was her niece, a girl she had never met, but already felt a connection to. The next step was introducing Rachel to Emily. John wasn't sure how Emily would react, but when the two met, something unspoken passed between them. Emily stared at Rachel for a long time, her eyes wide with wonder. And then, slowly, she smiled. Over the following weeks, Rachel became a part of their lives. It wasn't an easy process. There were awkward moments and painful memories, but slowly, a new kind of family began to form. They visited Sarah's grave together, sharing stories, tears, and laughter. For John, it was a strange mix of emotions. He would always miss Sarah, but in Rachel, he saw a reflection of the woman he had loved. And as he watched Emily grow closer to her aunt, he realized that life had a way of giving second chances, even in the most unexpected ways. Together, they began to heal. And while the past couldn't be changed, the future was filled with possibilities.